The year is 1836. The Battle of San Jacinto has just ensured the independence of Texas. But while Texans celebrate the victory against Mexico, their general, Sam Houston, knows a truth that few could imagine. Most deadly enemies do not always wield swords or rifles. Some hide in the shadows between the worlds. For years, Houston had carried a sacred object, presented by the Cherokee who welcomed him as a son, an ancient talisman that protected him from the vigilant eyes of revengeful spirits. But when a political rival, obsessed with power, steals this artifact from his chest as he sleeps, the barriers that kept the away supernatural entities break. Now, persecuted by Cherokee mythology creatures that require a terrible price for old transgressions, Houston must fight not only to maintain the fragile newly formed republic, but also to save his own soul. This is the unprecedented history of the founder of Texas in his confrontation with forces that challenge human understanding, a battle fought in the shadows of American history, while a nation was born in the lands that had long belonged to the early peoples. What you learn from history books never reveals the full picture. Behind the decisive battles, the eloquent discourses, and the political decisions that shaped our country, there were more personal and often supernatural struggles that remained hidden in the shadows. Sam Houston, the man that many consider the founding father of Texas, faced demons that transcended the simple political or military rivalries. His complex relationship with the Cherokee who adopted him kept secrets that conventional history has never dared to explore so far. Cherokee's Curse. Sam Houston's personal diary, discovered in 1913. It is with trembling hands that record these events. I do it not for glory or post-term recognition, but simply to preserve the sanity that I have left. Perhaps one day these pages are found and serve as a warning to those who underestimate the forces that exist beyond the veil of common understanding. Or perhaps it is better than staying hidden, like so many other secrets I have carried over the years. It all started 3 weeks after the victory in San Jacinto. The euphoria of Texan independence still permeated the air, but it was already evident that the true struggle for the survival of the young republic had only begun. Mexico threatened retaliation, the Comanche attacked settlements on the west border, and internal factions disputed the direction our nation should take. As an interim president, I carried the weight of these concerns constantly. But there was a comfort that never left me, the amulet I received during my years among the Cherokee. Made of polished river stone, with antique symbols carved by experienced hands and wrapped in tendon-stitched deer leather, the talisman had been a gift from Mythology, the power doctor who supervised my adoption on the tribe in 1829. This will keep you safe from the hungry eyes of Nunnehi and vengeful spirits, he told me at the time. A man who walks between two worlds attracts unwanted attention from those who inhabit the borders. For years, I carried the amulet near my chest under my clothes, rarely removing it even to sleep or bathe. And through diverse battles, injuries and dangers, I remained strangely protected from certain threats that I could not explain, but felt in the peripheral shadows of my consciousness. That fateful night, I had finally succumbed to exhaustion after properly sleeping days. Even interim presidents need rest, and my temporary rooms in New Washington offered at least the illusion of security. As he woke up the next morning, I immediately realized that something was wrong. The leather cord that held the amulet had been cut. The talisman had disappeared. At first I suspected a common thief. Even sacred, the amulet contained turquoise inlays that could try someone desperate for some change. I started discreet investigations, not wanting to cause unnecessary alarm or reveal the personal importance of the object. It was Thomas Collingsworth who provided the first track, although inadvertently. Collingsworth, who had been appointed Secretary of State in my office, casually mentioned that he watched Anthony Butler hurrying the housing building near the dawn. He knew Butler being an ambitious opportunist who had served as U.S. business manager in Mexico under the administration of Andrew Jackson. Butler had recently arrived at Texas, ostensibly to offer support to the new republic, but I suspected less altruistic reasons. The man aimed political power in Texas and barely disguised his contempt for my leadership. More worrying, I knew my time among Cherokee, often alluding to it in public conversations as a way of questioning my loyalty to the cause of white settlers. But even suspected of Butler, he could not accuse him openly without proof. and there were more urgent subjects demanding my attention. The young republic needed a permanent constitution, an elected government, international recognition. It was the third night after the theft that I truly realized what I had lost. After a long day of constitutional debates, I removed for a brief lonely ride under the moonlight. I always enjoyed such moments of reflection, especially under the open sky that remembered my freer days among the Cherokee. Initially, I didn't notice anything unusual beyond silence. An absolute, disturbing silence. No insect sang, no wind whispered between the trees. As if all nature were containing breathing. So, on the outskirts of my vision, I noticed a movement. Turning quickly, I glimpsed what seemed to be a figure watching myself closely from an old oak. The silhouette was vaguely human, but there was something fundamentally wrong in its proportions, too high and thin, with members that seemed to move in unnatural ways. "Who is there?" I demanded, instinctively seeking the knife it always carried. No answer, only the sound of branches breaking as the figure retreated to the denser shadows. I convinced myself that it was just an animal, or perhaps my imagination exhausted preaching pieces. I returned to my quarters and eventually fell into a restless sleep. The dreams came immediately. I found myself again in the Cherokee village where I had lived, but distorted, dark. The family faces of those who had adopted and taught were now disfigured, their eyes replaced by wells of darkness. They surrounded me, pointing and whispering in a tongue that sounded like Cherokee, but incomprehensible to me. Suddenly the crowd opened and Eulogy advanced. Her body was covered with symbols that seemed to squirm on her skin as if they were alive. In one hand, he held my stolen amulet. "You abandon your people," he said in a voice that reverberated as if he came from a deep canyon. "Now they come to charge the debt." I woke up cold sweat stew, rapid breathing. One presence remained in the room, an oppressive feeling of being observed. I lit a candle with trembling hands and inspected every corner of the simple rooms. Nothing. But when the full of the candle lit the small mirror on the opposite wall, I froze. For a brief moment, so brief that I later wondered if it was really happened, it was not my reflection I saw, but a tall and skeletal figure, with the head of a crow and eyes like ardent stamps. The vision lasted only a second before my own frightened face returned to the mirror. Kelowna. The crow of the Cherokee legends. He who brings nightmares and feeds on the fear of mortals. I laughed nervously from my own feverish imagination. He had abandoned such superstitions a long time ago, had become a civilized, Christian man, a leader of a modern republic. And yet, the fright of that night was just the beginning. On subsequent days, I realized increasing signs that I was no longer alone, even when physically unaccompanied. Shadows moved incorrectly, following me instead of responding to light. Muffled sounds echoed in the empty corners of the rooms where he worked. The peculiar odor of rotting leaves and stagnant water followed me even in the cleaner environments. In cabinet meetings, I momentarily lost my concentration by noticing figures watching through the windows, figures that disappeared when others drove their eyes in the same direction. During an important speech to New Washington citizens, I almost lost the flow of thought when I spotted, at the bottom of the crowd, an indigenous-looking man wearing traditional Cherokee clothes. When I blinked, he had disappeared. My behavior began to generate concern among my colleagues. Collingsworth commented on my exhausted look and asked if I was sleeping properly. General Russ questioned my growing trend of looking over his shoulder during conversations. Butler, always around, watched with a malicious smile that didn't reach his calculating eyes. In the 7th night after the theft, the confrontation I finally feared occurred. I had retired early, waiting to fight the exhaustion that drained not only my body, but my ability to lead effectively. Sleep came quickly, but did not bring rest. I woke up suddenly, feeling pressure on my chest that made my breath difficult. Darkness in the room was absolute, denser than the mere absence of light, as if the shadows themselves had a substance. And in the midst of this darkness, eyes. Dozens of them, in various shapes and colors, all fixed on me. "Kalane," a voice whispered, "my name Cherokee. The adopted son who forgot his oaths." The pressure on my chest increased. I tried to move my arms, but were trapped by my side for invisible forces. I tried to scream, but my voice produced only a suffocated moan. You walked between us, continued the voice, now multiplying in a whispering choir. He learned our secrets. He promised to defend our people. But when Andrew Jackson ordered our removal, where were you? When our children died on the Tear Trail, where was the great Kalane? The accusations cut more deeply than any physical blade could. Because they contained truth. I had been adopted by Cherokee, had lived between them for years, had witnessed his wisdom and kindness. And when they were forced to abandon their ancestral lands in what would be known as the Tear Trail, I was absent, first sunk in personal problems and alcoholism after my failed marriage to Eliza Allen, then consumed by the cause of Texan independence. I tried. I managed to mutter against the growing pressure. I wrote letters to Jackson. I argued against removal. A bitter laugh fluctuated through the darkness. Words in the wind. Meanwhile, blood on earth. Darkness began to condense, forming more defined figures around my bed. I recognized the Nunnehi, the immortals of Cherokee mythology, spirits that may appear as humans but never get older or die. There were also the Raven Mockers, half-man creatures, a half-crowd that feed on the dying. And in the background, a gigantic form that could only be the Uctina, the cornuta serpent with crystals capable of mesmerizing its prey. Without its protective amulet, it is vulnerable, said the main voice, which I now recognized as belonging to a central figure who gradually took the form of Mythology, the power doctor who had presented me with the talisman. But it was not truly him. His eyes were empty, his translucent skin as if there were no real substance behind it. We came to charge our debt. With a supreme effort, I managed to break the paralysis that held me. I rolled to the side of the bed, falling heavily on the floor. The fall brought clarity, a brief moment of lucidity. I used to drag myself to the door. The spirits advanced, but seemed limited in some way, as if there was still something preventing their total power. I reached the doorknob, forced the door and staggered to the corridor. Behind me, I heard frustrated screams and the sound of objects being thrown. I ran through the house in sleeping costumes, descending the stairs in panic and emerging at night. The full moon illuminated the ground, and for a moment, I felt relief as I left the suffocating darkness behind. It was when I saw the footprints on the damp land. No human footsteps, but marks that resembled gigantic bird impressions, leading from the front door to the shadows of the nearby trees. And on the edge of those shadows, watching silently, were the same figures that had confronted me in the room, now more substantial in the moonlight. "You can't get away from us, Kalane," said Mythology's spirit. "Now that the seal is broken, we will follow you until the end of your days, or until the debt is paid." "What debt?" I asked, trying to gain time as I slowly retreated toward the lights of the adjacent government building, where guards could be on duty. "The debt of blood and honor," he answered. "You swore like a Cherokee, drank from the same container, accepted our protection. Then it turned your back when we needed it." "I can't change the past," I argued. "But I can do something now. As Texas president, I have influence. I can help the Cherokee here." A dry laugh echoed between the creatures. "Words again. Always words. So what do you require?" I asked, my firmer voice now, finding some of the courage I had sustained in so many battlefields. Mythology's spirit advanced a step, partially leaving the shadows. In the moonlight, its shape seemed to float between substance and steam. "First, recover what was stolen. The amulet was not made for profane hands. And then listen carefully." The empty eyes fired on mine. "When you are ready to truly pay your debt, you will know what you should do. Until then, you won't be alone. Never again." With these words, the figures retreated to the shadows, disappearing like mist under the rising sun. But the feeling of his presence persisted, a constant weight in the bottom of my mind. That morning, with renewed determination, I began the search for the stolen amulet. He could not confront Butler directly without evidence, but could carefully observe him, study his movements, look for an opportunity. The opportunity came 3 days later during a formal reception for potential investors from New Orleans. Butler appeared showing unusual confidence, drinking generously and speaking aloud about the possibilities of Texas territorial expansion. I noticed that I repeatedly touched a small object hanging in a chain inside his vest, an almost superstitious gesture at its frequency. I approached discreetly as he was distracted talking to a New Orleans banker. Positioning myself strategically, I was able to briefly glimpse the object. When he touched it again, it was unmistakably my Cherokee amulet, now hanging in an ornate silver stream. My suspicion had been confirmed, but the challenge of recovering it remained. A public accusation would be politically disastrous, especially considering that it would have to explain the importance of the object, an explanation that would inevitably involve my past Cherokee, a subject that many Texans saw with suspicion. The following weeks have become a strange balance between my public responsibilities as president and my private struggle against supernatural forces. During the day, he worked tirelessly to establish the foundations of the new republic, negotiating international recognition, organizing defenses against possible Mexican raids, mediating disputes between Texan factions. At night, he faced increasingly aggressive visitors from the Cherokee spirit world. The Raven Mockers tormented my sleep with horrible views of death and destruction. The Nunnehi appeared in the corners of the rooms, silently observing with expressions of eternal disapproval. Octina slid down the shadows, its presence announced by a decomposition odor and the occasional brightness of its hypnotic crystals, which I carefully avoided looking directly. I developed strategies to mitigate your influences. I found that certain herbs Cherokee had taught me to recognize when they burned, created a smoke that temporarily repelled the entities. Drawing protection symbols on the doors and windows offered some barrier, although progressively weaker over the days. More effective was to recite certain prayers Cherokee that Mythology had taught me years earlier. The words, almost forgotten, returned to my lips as if guided by a deeper memory than the conscious mind. When properly pronounced, prayers made creatures retreat, though never for long. Meanwhile, Butler observed methodically, learning his habits, seeking vulnerabilities. He had rented a small house on the outskirts of New Washington, where he spent most of the nights alone. During the day, I continually tried to insinuate the circles of power, often contradicting my political positions in conversations with other officers. The effect of my private struggle began to manifest publicly. I lost weight quickly. Deep dark circles marked my face. Occasionally, it was caught responding to voices that no one else could hear. Rumors that I had returned to my former drink habits began to circulate, although I had remained strictly sober, knowing that I would need all my mental clarity. It was General Rusk who finally confronted me directly, entering my office and closing the door firmly behind him. "Sam," he said, abandoning the usual formality, "something is wrong. Severely wrong. And he is affecting his ability to lead." I considered denying it, as I had done so far. But Thomas Rusk was one of the few men I genuinely respected and trusted, a soldier who had fought beside me in San Jacinto, a politician with solid principles. "Thomas," I answered after a long moment, "if I tell you the truth, you'll think I went crazy." "Try me," he said, sitting in the chair opposite mine. "I've seen things on this border that would challenge the understanding of any reasonable man." And so, hesitantly, I shared my situation. The Cherokee amulet, his theft, the supernatural visits, my suspicions about Butler. As I spoke, I carefully watched Rusk's face, waiting for the moment when disbelief or concern for my sanity would manifest itself. To my surprise, he heard without interruption, his face remaining seriously attentive. When I finished, he remained silent for various times. "My wife was partially Cherokee," he said finally. "Before died last year, she often spoke of similar beliefs. Guardian spirits, entities linked to Earth and ancestors." He paused. I never completely discarded these stories. There was things that she knew that she couldn't know by ordinary means. "So you believe me?" I asked, almost unable to hide my relief. "Let's say I am willing to consider possibilities beyond madness or feverish imagination." He leaned forward. "Regardless of the exact nature of your torment, One thing is clear, you need to recover this amulet, both for your health and for the stability of the Republic. Butler the nearby guard, I explained. And a public accusation would be politically catastrophic. So it will not be public, replied Rusk with a certain glow in his eyes. I am a lawyer by training, Sam, but I am also a soldier. Some situations require direct methods. That same night, Rusk and I developed a plan. He would invite Butler to a private meeting, allegedly to discuss possible political alliances against me. While Butler was away from home, I would enter his residence and recover the amulet. It was risky and technically illegal, the kind of action that could destroy my presidency if discovered. But weighing against the alternative of becoming progressively more disabled by supernatural torments, it seemed the smallest of evils. The following night, our plan was put into action. Rusk sent a confidential messenger inviting Butler to an urgent meeting at his temporary residence, implying possession of compromising information about me. With the vanity and ambition that characterized him, Butler promptly accepted. At 9 o'clock, I noticed from the shadow of an oak as Butler left his house and left toward Rusk's residence. When your steps disappeared in the distance, I approached. The house was simple, with equally simple locks that I easily gave in using skills learned during my youth adventures. Inside, I found a surprisingly austere environment for such a publicly ostentatious man: few furniture, minimal decoration, partially packaged travel chests as if he did not intend to stay long. I looked methodically, aware that my time was limited. The main room was equally Spartan: a simple bed, a small table, a chest for clothes. On the table, I found correspondence that confirmed my worst suspicions, letters from certain Mexican officers suggesting that Butler was providing information about Texan defenses in exchange for promises of political power after a reconquesting potential. But there was no sign of the amulet. I checked under the mattress inside the chest, behind books on the small shelf. Nothing. Time passed dangerously. That's when I noticed a loose on the floor near the head of the bed. Squirmy, I managed to lift the board, revealing a small compartment. Inside, a carved wooden box. When I opened the box, I felt a wave of relief. There was my Cherokee amulet, still hanging in the silver chain that Butler had added. Beside him, other sentimental items that I recognized as trophies of other victims: a brooch that had belonged to the businessman Sterling, a small hunting knife with the initials of a dead officer in San Jacinto. I just got my amulet, leaving the other items as they were. I replaced the board in its place and carefully deleted any sign of my presence. So, as quietly as I had entered, I left the house with the precious talisman surely in my pocket. I had only traveled half the way back to my residence when I felt the change. The shadows, which for weeks had seemed denser and more threatening than normal, again behaved as simple absences of light. The oppressive weight that constantly pressured my mind relieved. The night air, which had carried a constant decomposition odor, now brought only the natural aromas of land and vegetation. When I got home, I immediately replaced the amulet in a new leather cord and positioned it against my chest. The feeling was to return to a long-abandoned home, familiar, comforting, certain. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No supernatural visitors, no nightmares, just the rest that my body and mind so desperately needed. In the morning, preparing for the day's appointments, I noticed something unusual in the mirror. The amulet, which was once simply a padded stone, now displayed a soft luminescence under some lighting, as if it had absorbed something from the entities that had kept away for so many years. Even more remarkable, I felt a mental clarity and certainty of purpose that it was absent for weeks. Decisions that once seemed overloaded by doubts now presented themselves with clear paths. My first act that morning was to call a private meeting to write a formal treaty with the Cherokee tribes that had settled in the east of Texas. The treaty would formally recognize its lands, guarantee protection against forced displacement, and establish channels of commerce and communication. It was a small step to remedy great injustices, but it was a beginning. While working in the document, I felt a presence in the room unlike threatening presences of the previous weeks. It was a sense of approval, like a silent nod of ancestors watching. As for Butler, his betrayal was exposed 3 days later, when Rusk coincidentally sent soldiers to inspect his residence after reports of suspicious activity. The incriminating letters were discovered and Butler was arrested for espionage. He protested intensely, and in his final delusions before being escorted to prison, shouted accusations about my pagan fetish and how I had been bewitched by the wild. Few pay attention to the words of a desperate traitor. In the following years, I kept the amulet with me. Through my mandates as President of the Republic of Texas, during annexation to the United States, in my time as a senator and governor, the talisman remained close to my heart, a constant reminder of past debts and continuous responsibilities. Occasionally, on particularly silent nights or during severe storms, I still feel presence observing the shadows. But now they are not threatening, they are vigilant, protective to their own austere way. And sometimes, when difficult political decisions confront me, especially those involving treatment of American natives or fundamental justice issues, I realize the amulet warm up against my skin. A gentle, albeit firm reminder of promises made and the price of breaking them. This is the truth that I take with me to the tomb, that the man known as the Texas hero, as a statesman and leader, carried knowledge and burdens that few could understand. That the line between worlds is faster than most imagine. And that old promises, once made, are never truly forgotten by those who inhabit the other side of the veil. Samuel Houston, written in Huntsville, 1861. The Cherokee Connection. Of the private correspondence of Dr. Harrison Williams, 1913. My dear teacher Childress, after receiving your consultation on the items recovered during Huntsville's Woodland Casa renewal, Sam Houston's last residence, I am compelled to share discoveries that I have prudently kept in an extremely restricted circle. The diary you mentioned, bound in worn leather with the initials SH recorded, has been in my custody for almost 6 months. Its content, which partially transcribed in the attached correspondence, presents a side of Sam Houston that fundamentally contradicts the conventional historical narrative we build on man. More remarkable than the diary, however, is the artifact found next to it, carefully wrapped in cotton fabric and sealed in a small cedar box. It is a polished stone amulet, with approximately 3 inches in diameter, carved with symbols that my colleague from the University of Oklahoma, Dr. James Mooney, a respected scholar of Cherokee culture, immediately identified as authentic and extremely rare. According to Mooney, the object is known among Cherokee as UTLA, NAWA, a high-status protective talisman, usually created only for significant members of the tribe or extremely valued allies. The recorded symbols combine elements of spiritual protection with specific Blue Cherokee bird clan identifiers, known for their ability to mediate between the physical and spiritual world. What makes this artifact truly extraordinary, however, is your condition. Despite being almost a century of age when found, the stone maintains impossible polishing, as if it had been worked recently. Even more disturbing, under certain lighting conditions, specifically in candlelight or during twilight, the notch emit a subtle bluish luminescence that challenges scientific explanation. Initial analyses of mineral composition revealed anomalies that our geologists cannot explain. The stone contains traces of previously catalogued elements, with unique crystalline properties that seem to subtly alter its molecular arrangement when observed by prolonged periods. But the most disturbing aspect relates to the effects that artifact seems to exert on those who handle it. The technician who first examined him, Mr. Thornfield, reported vivid dreams with Passaro people for the next nights. My own experience includes an inexplicable feeling of being observed whenever I study the object for more than a few minutes, accompanied by almost imperceptible sounds, as whispers in a language that I do not consciously recognize, but that produces strange familiarity. The connection between this artifact and the content of Houston's diary is inescapable. His descriptions of supernatural torments, visits by Cherokee entities, and the protective power of the amulet gain a disturbing dimension when confronted with the physical existence of this seemingly anomalous object. I must emphasize that these observations are shared in strict academic confidence. General Houston's reputation as a pillar of Texan American history should not be compromised by speculation about beliefs that modern society would consider primitive. In addition, I have serious doubts about how the scientific community would react to statements about objects with seemingly supernatural properties, even backed by empirical observations. For now, I keep the diary and amulet in my personal safe. If you want to examine them personally, I suggest a discreet visit to Austin next month, when I can host it properly and show you these extraordinary artifacts. One last observation that you may consider mere superstition: since the amulet was removed from its resting place at Houston's former residence, 3 of the workers involved in renewal reported disturbing experiences. One claims to have seen a tall crow's head of crow watching his house at night. Another has developed inexplicable marks similar to burns on the wrist. The third simply disappeared after mentioning voices calling him the woods near his property. Coincidences, certainly. Still, I am increasingly inclined to return the amulet to its original place, sealed again in cedar and protected from the curious eyes of modernity. There are things from the American past, my dear friend, who may be better left untrained. With the best greetings, Dr. Harrison Williams, University of Texas, May 7, 1913. The Guardian of the Amulet. Testimony of Robert Hawkins, Texas A&M, Department of Anthropology, 2018. I started this study as a skeptical. As an anthropologist specializing in intersection between indigenous material culture and European colonization in America, I am used to demystifying alleged magic objects and revealing their very earthly cultural and social functions. When I received the scholarship to investigate the so-called Houston amulet, an artifact kept in extraordinary safety conditions in the Special Archive of Texas's Historical Society, I simply hoped to document another example of cultural appropriation by prominent figures in American history. 5 years later, I'm no more right. My first contact with the amulet occurred under security protocols that then seemed absurdly excessive. Acid-free cotton gloves, controlled lighting, constant supervision of 2 curators. The object itself seemed remarkably common at first glance: a polished circular stone, with notches that, although skillfully executed, did not seem extraordinary for a Cherokee artifact of the period. It was only on the 3rd day of analysis that I noticed the first anomaly. By photographing the object from different angles, I realized that certain notches simply did not appear in digital images. Taking a flaw in the equipment, I requested an alternative camera with the same result. Analog photographs later revealed distortions precisely in the same areas. Non-invasive spectroscopic analysis presented equally disconcerting results. The mineral composition showed impossible elements for a natural stone of the Cherokee region, including traces of a non-catalogued metal in the current periodic table. When I mentioned this to the curatorial team, I was surprised by the air of resignation, not by surprise. That's why we maintain such strict conditions, explained Chief Curator Dr. Martinez. This is not the first scientific study of the artifact. Only the first in decades we approved. It was then that they granted me access to restricted files, reports, letters, and diaries documenting almost a century of anomalous meetings related to the amulet. The pattern was consistent and disturbing. Each time the object was manipulated extensively, removed from its cedar-protected enclosure, or kept outside the facilities of Historical Society for extended periods, unexplainable incidents followed. In 1934, a historian who requested to lend the amulet for temporary exhibition in San Antonio reported that the showcases were found shredded 3 consecutive mornings, despite safety. Witnesses described giant bird-shaped shadows on surveillance monitors. In 1967, an attempt to create an exact replica of the amulet resulted in the inexplicable fire of the artisan studio, destroying all the molds and photographs of the original. The artisan later abandoned his profession, citing recurring dreams with a man wearing a loud hat that watches me from the foot of the bed. In 1986, the amulet was briefly borrowed for analysis at Rice University. During the 2 weeks he remained in the laboratory, 6 graduate students reported independent but consistent views of an extremely high American native figure in the building's corridors after dusk. Initially, I kept my skepticism. Supernatural stories are often grouped around significant historical artifacts, a well-documented psychological phenomenon resulting from suggestion and expectation. The incidents could easily be explained by coincidences, human error, or even institutional urban legend. This rationalist position became increasingly difficult to maintain as my research advanced. In the third month of study, I began to notice anomalies in my own experience. First came the dreams, vivid and consistent, portraying wooded landscapes that I later identified as corresponding to the descriptions of the eastern Cherokee territory of the early 19th century. In dreams, I watched meetings from people I recognized for costumes and language as Cherokee, although I am not speaking of the language. Even more disturbing, upon waking, he could remember specific words and phrases that, when checking with specialized linguists, proved to be authentic and archaic Cherokee. Then came the sensations of being observed during the study sessions with the amulet. At first subtle, a peripheral movement, sudden air cooling. Eventually, more accurate, the distinct impression of someone standing just behind my chair, breathing gently. When I turned, of course, there was no one. I had structured my research to include a comparative analysis phase with other contemporary Cherokee artifacts to the amulet. It was during this phase that the incident occurred that finally shook my skepticism beyond recovery. He was alone in the materials laboratory, comparing amulet microphotographs with samples from other Cherokee ceremonial items. It was late, probably after midnight, and the building was silent. When analyzing a particularly intriguing section of the carvings, I noticed that they move under my gaze. Not dramatically, but as a subtle reconfiguration, similar to liquid painting slowly flowing. I backed away from the microscope lens, rubbing my eyes, taking fatigue. When I looked again, the symbols had definitely changed. The pattern now included a symbol that was not present previously, one that immediately recognized my research as representing observer or witness in ancient Cherokee iconography. I got up abruptly, dropping my chair. It was then that I heard the voice, clear, male, with a slight southern accent, speaking straight behind me. They don't like to be studied like that. They never liked it. I turned, hoping to find a security guard or colleague who had entered silently. Instead, I saw the silhouette of a tall man with a distinctive hat of wide tabs, an instantly recognizable figure of numerous historical portraits like Sam Houston. The figure was not completely solid, one could see the wall through it, and it lasted only a moment before dissipating as smoke. The security system later confirmed that I had been in the laboratory alone all night. The camera showed my reaction to the apparent nothing. This incident marked a turning point in my research and, frankly, in my worldview. I abandoned the claim of pure scientific objectivism and began to seriously consider the implications of Houston's descriptions in his newly discovered diary. And it was then that dreams intensified. No more as a passive observer, now I participated directly. In a recurring dream, I am taken to a clearing where 7 Cherokee elders are gathered in a circle. They talk to me in clear English, though with a distinctive accent. "The amulet is not for study," says the eldest repeatedly. "It's a seal, a door, a barrier between worlds." While remaining with the descendants of the people or their chosen guardian, the door remains closed. When I ask who the guardian is, they always point to a figure in the shadow of the trees, the same silhouette I saw in the lab. The last year of my research has become something very different from the anthropological study I had planned. I was effectively a historian of the inexplicable, documenting not only the amulet itself, but the extensive network of events, experiences and phenomena that seemed to orbit around it. My conclusion, however professionally dangerous, has become inescapable. The artifact known as Houston Amulet is not merely a cultural or historical object. It is an article of genuine power, created through means and knowledge that contemporary science cannot explain. Its function, as suggested by both Houston's diary and my own experiences, seems to be double, protecting his bearer from Cherokee folklore entities while simultaneously linking him to obligations to the Cherokee people. The most disturbing is the growing evidence that these entities, the Nunnehi, Raven Mockers, and other beings described in the texts, are not simply mythological constructions. They seem to have a form of existence that interacts with our reality in limited but verifiable ways. Texas's Historical Society, for its credit, seems to understand the situation better than I initially supplied. The rigorous protocol for the amulet handling, the cedar enclosure in which it is maintained, and the reluctance to allow its removal of the facilities, all these measures reflect an institutional knowledge transmitted through generations of curators. My formal recommendation for society is that the amulet remains in its current state of protected storage, with extremely limited access. Additionally, I began dialogue with contemporary Cherokee leaders about the possible repatriation of artifact, not for political reasons for historical justice, but for genuine concern about the consequences of keeping the object separate from its appropriate cultural context. As a personal note, I must admit that I find myself now in the disconcerting role of scientist defending the apparently irrational. My colleagues in the department observe with visible concern my growing obsession with the artifact. My department head subtly suggested a prolonged license. Maybe they are right. Perhaps the prolonged proximity to the amulet has affected my objectivity in ways I cannot completely perceive. Or perhaps I just looked very deeply at an aspect of American history that we prefer to keep overwhelmed, that the native cultures we move and destroy had knowledge and connections with this land that transcended our materialistic understanding. That figures like Sam Houston, who crossed the world border, have discovered truths that our history books cannot accommodate. Last night I dreamed of the clearing again. This time Houston was there, partially dressed in European clothes, partially in traditional Cherokee clothing. He looked at me straight and said, "There are older debts than the nation, and promises that live more than men." When I woke up, I found a perfectly black crown pity on the pillow beside me. I live in the 10th walking of a modern apartment building with non-open windows. I now rebuild the purpose of my research. Perhaps this is not analysis or explanation. Perhaps I was chosen, like Houston before me, to be briefly guarding a secret that connects two worlds, and the responsibilities that accompany this knowledge. Epilogue, Austin, Texas, present. Journal de Dr. Elena Vasquez, October 7, 2023. The dream came back last night. More vivid this time. I am in the middle of a dense forest that I know intuitively is the east of Texas or perhaps the west of Arkansas for almost 2 centuries. A tall man with a characteristic hat walks in front of me, occasionally looking back as if he still follows him. I know it's Sam Houston, although it never sees your face clearly. He leads me to a clearing where 7 Cherokee elders are sitting in a circle around a small fire. One of them raises what I immediately recognize as the amulet, the same carved stone that now rests locked in the drawer of my table, sent anonymously 3 weeks ago with a simple note, "Your turn to keep." In the dream, the elder speaks directly to me, "The Sadats are weakening. What has been kept away from generations now press the barrier. A new guardian must take over the pact." Then they show disturbing images, shadows with giant birds hanging over modern cities, translucent figures watching sleeping people, a gigantic serpent with crystal on their foreheads sliding through the waters of a modern Texan lake. I always wake up at the same point when Houston turns finally and I completely see his face. His eyes are not human, but entirely black, like those of a crow. I spent the whole week researching obsessively, trying to understand how this object came to my hands. The chain of custody I managed to rebuild is fascinating and disturbing. 1863, after Sam Houston's death, the amulet remains with its widow Margaret until his death. 1913, discovered at Houston's former residence during renewals, along with the diary, by Dr. Harrison Williams. 1934 to 2018, kept under varying degrees of security by the Historical Society of Texas, periodically studied despite the associated incidents. 2018, last formal study by Dr. Robert Hawkins, who later renounced the academic position and, according to reports, moved to the Cherokee Reserve in Oklahoma. 2022, records show that the amulet was formally repatriated for the Eastern Band Cherokee, but tribal representatives officially deny having received the artifact. 2023, the object appears on my door, an unknown sender. The question that plagues me is, why do I am just an assistant teacher of American history, specializing in the period of the Republic of Texas. I never published anything specific about Houston or its connection to the Cherokee. I have no known American Native ancestry. I do not have special qualifications to keep a historical artifact, much less one with alleged supernatural properties. However, since the amulet arrived, strange things occur regularly. I see movements on the outskirts of my vision constantly, shadows that seem to have wings. My cat refuses to enter the office where I keep the artifact, giving it nervously. I find marks similar to giant bird footprints in my house's garden in the morning, although it hasn't rained for weeks and the soil is hard. I started to understand words in Cherokee without ever studying the language. More disturbing is what happens when I consider it delivering the amulet to the authorities. The first time I seriously contemplated the police, all the lights of my house flashed simultaneously. In the second attempt, when researched the university's archaeology department number, my computer turned off completely, and when he called again, the open file contained only one sentence in Cherokee that later translated as "The Guardian does not abandon his post." Yesterday, in an act of despair or courage, I put the amulet under a magnifying glass and studied the carvings carefully. For my shock, I recognized my own name among the symbols not in Latin alphabet, but in phonetically traditional Cherokee syllable characters, Iluna. A name that could not possibly be in an artifact with 2 centuries of age. Unless the symbols change. Unless the amulet is truly what Houston described, not just an object, but a bridge between worlds, a living barrier that requires a human guardian. This morning I tried an experiment. I put the amulet around the neck, as Houston reported having done. The effect was immediate and deep. The peripheral shadows disappeared. The feeling of being continually observed dissipated. In its place came mental clarity that I had not experienced for weeks. And then, when I looked in the bathroom mirror, soon so briefly I could convince myself that I imagined it, I saw Sam Houston stop behind me, nodding. I now understand, somehow that transcends the rational, which I was chosen as the next guardian. That my academic research on the Republic of Texas was not coincidence, but preparation. That the apparently broken amulet's line of custody actually remains intact through chosen guardians whose names rarely appear in official records. What I don't understand is, why now? Why, after almost 2 centuries, is the amulet circulating again, actively seeking a guardian? What are you pressuring against the barrier that Houston mentioned? What ancient threat is resurgence that requires renewed vigilance? Dreams continue to offer fragments of answers. Modern excavations images disturbing old places. Urban developments expanding the territories that remained untouched for centuries. Climate change destabilizing natural barriers. The rational teacher in me still fights these conclusions. Seeks psychological explanations, statistical coincidences, elaborate tricks. But each day brings new confirmations that I cannot ignore. Earlier today, while walking through the University of Texas campus, I noticed a Cherokee elder watching me from a bank. As I approached, he spoke in clear English. Raven Mockers seeks those who are between worlds. The amulet protects, but also binds. Houston's debt is now yours. When I asked what it meant, he simply answered, some preserve the story in books. Others keep it alive in their breasts, beating like a second heart. Then he looked away momentarily, and when I focused again, the bench was empty. Tonight I will put the amulet again. I will accept what increasingly seems to be my destiny. And perhaps, in the dreams that will surely come, I will finally fully understand what Sam Houston discovered almost 2 centuries ago, that American history has deeper and stranger layers than any textbook has ever admitted. That the divisions between worlds are faster than we imagine. And that old promises, once made, must be honored, regardless of the cost. The amulet waits in the drawer. I feel your call even now. It's my turn to keep. You have just witnessed one of the best-kept stories in American history, the real reason why Sam Houston, one of Texas's founders, has always kept such strong connections with Cherokee, even when it hurt his political career. History books tell us about their military victories and political achievements, but hide the supernatural battles he fought away from the public eyes. The Houston Cherokee amulet carried throughout his life is no mere legend. There are historical records of a mysterious artifact found among his belongings after his death, quickly hidden by those who feared the implications of his existence. And reports of inexplicable sightings, prophetic dreams and supernatural presences continue to follow those who very deeply investigate this story. If this account has aroused its curiosity about the hidden supernatural secrets in American history, be sure to subscribe to our channel to discover more narratives than traditional historians are afraid to tell. Each week, we reveal surprising connections between famous historical figures and the supernatural world that exists in the shadows of our reality. Leave in the comments other aspects of Sam Houston's life that you would like us to explore, or other historical figures that may have had connections to the supernatural. Activate Nunnehi to be notified of our next videos, and share with friends who appreciate when history and mystery intertwine. Because the story you learn at school is just the surface. The true stories, the most terrifying and fascinating, were deliberately erased from official records. And we are here to bring them back to light.